Welcome everybody to another interview here. Today we have Foy Savas, and Foy and I go back quite a ways. A little bit of Dockyard history here. Dockyard may not exist if not for Foy, because he handed off one of, I think, our second paid project ever, Tapology. If I'm sure you remember, and Greg. Uh, Foy had built it in, I think, Rails 3 at the time. It was like pretty close to that Rails 3 conversion. And you were moving on to another project, and you reached out to me, and I took it over and worked with Greg for maybe, I think, close to a year. And so it was one of those kind of like really early consulting projects that eventually I was able to transition into something larger, which eventually became Dockyard. So um,
That's that's amazing, Brian. And guess what? I ran into Greg on the street
oh, you did?
just about 2 weeks ago. We went Christmas shopping together,
Oh, that's
and
excellent.
I mean, it's such a success story. He told me, "Wow, look, it was 14 years ago that we worked together." And he's running this thing. This is his life. Tapology is his
Yeah.
baby, and it's grown like crazy. And
Yep.
it's cool. He's sitting down. We chatted about the stack. We chatted about everything. And Greg was such a fun guy to work with, because he wasn't just the guy that, oh yeah, I've got this idea for a startup. He really wanted, even as a non-tech guy, to become as technical as possible, to increase
Yep.
that technical prowess so that he could run the company well. So I taught him how to use Vim. We were coding in Ruby together, and all of those things are to this day empowering him. And as you said, eventually, I had to tap out of the project. We built the proof of concept, but yeah, it was great passing it on to you, and it's such a great success story.
So for those that are curious, you can go to tapology.com. It is a MMA website, and I think still it's probably one of the better built MMA sites out there. Like, definitely at the time, the MMA sites were kind of like, here is a BBS like system we stood up on some website and just have everyone yell at each other. And he wanted to take something that was actually like building a community around. And yeah, I was always impressed with his ability to pick things up quickly. He didn't come from a technical background. He learned as he went. And he, Greg could have probably, I think at some points during it too, everyone questions like whether their company is going to go under or continue to be, sustainable. And he was probably questioning whether or not he goes off, because I think he came from a marketing background, right? He
Yeah.
was in
Yeah,
marketing.
he was in the marketing and ad tech world, and
Yeah,
that's really
yeah.
enabled him now too. Like he
Yep.
understood the business behind what he was building, but the technical understanding of what he needed to do was lagging. And
Yeah.
I think it was great for him to connect with both me and you. And wow, it's a success story, and I think a great one.
So from there, I ran a conference, We Could Go to Ruby in Boston, and Foy was, I think, our closing keynote. And I've always been a big fan of Foy. I think he first got onto my radar was the Addison Wesley book that you had written for Ruby. And so, well, I didn't say it now, but everyone has probably gotten it. We both got to know each other through the Ruby community at the time. I have since gone off and done other things, and Foy has also gone off and done other things. So that's what we're here to discuss. So Foy's background, I think your education was also in business and finance, correct?
I studied
Some
math, guys. I
studied
studied
math. Okay, all right.
I've got a bit of a peculiar background. At one
But
point, I was just hanging out at the grad
you found a way
final,
to
but
marry everything, though.
yeah, I did. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, sorry. Yeah, I want to hand it over to you. Tell us about that. Your kind of career trajectory coming from you've seemed to have achieved like high level aptitude in most things that you've set out to get into, and how does that go? How do you make a decision where you're at a pretty senior level and you're like, I'm going to go and just like leave this and go off and like do something completely different?
Well, yeah, honestly, it makes talking about my career history a little bit difficult.
Okay.
There's always this aspect of like multi-threadedness in everything that I do. I've got something happening on the back burner almost at all times. But yeah, I came out of school and I started working as a tech consultant And I really love that kind of work. I love working with startups. I love technology. I just, I'm like, I mean, I have been coding since I was maybe 5 or 6. I accidentally got into it. And I found that I could just build things quickly. And it's really not just, technical things that interested me, but actually getting things done. I loved going to market. I loved like really building a thing. And I remember when I was in college, people would come up with crazy ideas, and maybe we're at the dining table and they come up with a crazy idea, and I'm like, okay, let's go do it. And I'd go and I'd do it. I'd build it right there, maybe. This aspect of spiking on anything that seemed interesting. Go ahead.
I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because I've actually been thinking about this a lot recently, and it could be just with age, where I'm like I'm getting older now, and I kind of view things a bit differently. But I feel like, or it could just be that the problem sets are more difficult to achieve now. Like in those early days of like Rails, mid 2000s, it did feel like that, where someone could come up with an idea and then over a weekend you could spike it out. Do you feel like that's still achievable nowadays?
Not in the same places. I think it's always achievable, but it's always in a hard to find place. More likely, you're going to find a good business opportunity somewhere where you're going to have to work for a couple months, maybe a year, before you really have a nice product that product market fit.
Right, but in other words, have all like the low-hanging fruit been achieved at this point? Like, so not to say that achieving Twitter scale is easy, but at least the very idea of like the status updates and posting the form, like that was probably a fairly, like the concept is easy to achieve through like web frameworks. But every new technology opens up a door on like all these possibilities. So now with machine learning and AI, we have this whole new set of low-hanging fruit that could potentially be achieved. But it can also be like a bit of a hammer and nail problem too, right? Like, are we just going to apply ML to everything? And does that make sense always? But it's kind of like, are we coming out of that that period where we're now moving into a state of maturity in the tech industry that it's going to take 6 months, it's going to take a year to bring a product to market that people feels that the quality that they're going to use and resonate with? Or are there still opportunities for like 3 people to get together, lock themselves in a room for a few days, and come up with something that in a few years is going to be a huge hit?
I think there's still opportunities for that, but they're in weird places, and even though you get that whooshing, I think I remember the early days of social media, right before pre-Facebook. I had built out a social networking site for my high school, and then when I went to college, I thought, so I'm going to build the same thing, and I even thought, I'm going to have to gate it somehow, but there's no way that I'm going to be able to gate all the. It's not like a high school where I can see who's real and who's not. I'm going to have to find some way to figure that out. Like, I'll use school email addresses, and I was building something like that. But just to go back to the high school. Social network I built, there was a whooshing. Like I built it, and then within 48 hours, everybody in my high school was on it.
Well, that's what you get addicted to, right? People using what you've built.
That was amazing. But the reality is that even when you have that kind of that whooshing that comes on, and I've experienced it a few times with projects that I've built, it's still just the beginning. It's still just the beginning. You get that early user base, but how are you going to retain them? How are you going to? The business hasn't even been conceived, right? It's just this early signal telling you that, wow, there's something here. Something's changing. There are secular changes in how people want to interact, what kind of technology they want to use, but it's still the beginning. So maybe it comes out in a few days. Maybe it's a weekend project, but really it's also a bit of a 10-year project to figure out how to grow that thing and how to really make it into the beast that it becomes. So those quick wins, I would be cautious of that. And one early, when you think about it, you build something quick, you give it to people. It tends to be a project that's just going to burn cash. Right? Think about all of the AI projects out there right now that Brian, you and I, we could go and build something interesting in a week. using large language models, stable diffusion, something like that. Stand it up online, get tons of people interested in it. But then we're gonna run into the problem at the end of the month and say, hey, look, this is how much we're losing. Do we keep this thing online? Do we
It's
keep
like
this thing
Pokemon
online?
Go, right? It's
Yeah.
that like was it the big thing for one summer. Everyone was using it, and then like, all right, how are we going to make money off this, or how do we
Yeah.
keep this sustainable? I mean, there is a sense of like trendiness that comes with tech consumption, and so like getting something to stick for the long term. You're right. That's definitely the hard problem to solve, but it's always felt like, at least for the Rails type frameworks now, when you're just doing like CRUD type operations, there's not a ton of ground left over in most of the probably the problem sets that people are being exposed to. But it's those new technologies that, AI, ML is saying, okay, now we can take this and do a twist upon it. But is the market also kind of, so like in the in like the JavaScript like client side application development world, the running kind of gag is that every like few weeks a new framework. It's not the case now. The cadence isn't as high as it used to be, but every few weeks a new framework come out on Hacker News, right? And so the fatigue would set in there, and then within companies it was constant churn on, we need to change over to this latest JavaScript library, and that just became a huge like debt nightmare that managers and stakeholders eventually became wise to. Does the same happen to products in the wild, where it's, just a fatigue of constantly having to go out and consumers learning new products, like consuming new products? Or is the appetite always there? Or is it generational, where, those younger people that are coming up are always hungry for the next thing? They don't want to be using what's been out there already.
I do think that we have a culture where every generation we want to change. we want to do something different. We want to be somewhere where the previous generation wasn't. But as a technologist, I really do think that emerging technologies always open up new possibilities and new ways of doing things, and people love that. Like, I think there are ancient texts written in hieroglyphics, like a poet saying that all the good work has already been written. And look where we are now, right? Like,
it's like when the what was it, the not the Copyright Office, but the U.S. You basically qualify something saying this is mine. Like in the late 1800s, the United States said like, oh, we've invented everything that could be invented by this point, and we're not really. But now there's been more like copyrights applied for in the past 100 years, like than there were. Sorry, in like 10 years nowadays, and there were in the past 100 years up until that point. Like it was something that this idea that innovation runs. I think innovation can run dry in a closed set, but when you consider like, new potential technology frontiers, then it's almost infinite at that point. But is the play to like, oh, we're going to take something that Atlassian has done, and we're just going to like do a twist on it with this new tech and go after them? Or is it like possibilities on something completely different that we've never even heard of before? Like for some ways, when you think of like our current set of tech leaders, these are in many ways just play upon pre-existing markets. Like Uber is just a reinvention of taxi companies. You have Amazon, which is a reinvention of, especially like nowadays, of what was that catalog? It wasn't Filene's. It was you could order how. Sears. Like, so like this is like the modern day Sears, that sort of thing. So are we kind of in this cyclical cycle where those that are established, like the big enterprise companies, are risk averse, and they're in that position to not really take on these new technologies, and there's always a door open for someone to come in and compete against them? Or is it going to be more viable to try to open up entirely new markets?
These are big questions, and I'm not sure how to answer them. And I think being optimistic about there being possibilities out there. I think if you're an entrepreneur, yes, there are opportunities, and there are definitely opportunities for small teams to outcompete large teams. to see opportunities in new emerging technologies that others don't. The big companies are always going to be laggards. But hey, there are economic cycles. There are changes in how much financing is out there. I worked in venture, and you have to think about, okay, well, what are the liquidity events associated with a potential investment? Are they going to get acquired? Are they going to IPO? Where is this going? Stay optimistic. I think the reality is that humans are more or less the same. We're not evolving faster than our technology at this moment. That's clear. So our basic needs are the same. But what technology is enabling is us to increasingly figure out the nuances of those needs and restructure our society and restructure our activities to better solve those problems. And I think we're still, humanity in general is still very, very early.
I would hope so. We got a long road ahead of us.
Human needs. Yeah, we do. We do. So stay optimistic. AI, large language models, this is extreme early days for this kind of stuff.
So let's go back to your career history. So you got into you were talking about your experience building a social network for your high school, and then as you stated at the beginning, you went into a mathematics concentration in university. Where do you go from there?
I started working as a tech consultant. I started working with startup groups. I had always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So, but I needed to make money. So the next best thing was consulting those groups. And I had so many adventures. I either, making companies that, didn't grow, but to IPO, but are still amazing tech companies, to things that were clones or flops or stuff like that. And I did work with a number of companies that, particularly in the ad tech space, where I was building out data warehousing systems, and they got acquired and were big wins. And so I was, I carved out a bit of a name for myself. And at the time, I think early in my career, when I was in high school, I was using PHP mostly, right? And then, people weren't even using, a lot of shops weren't even using version control back then, right? But I transitioned to Ruby, and Ruby was probably one of the first languages I truly loved. I think Matz's philosophy in crafting Ruby is perfect, right? Like
did you discover Ruby before Rails, or was that part of the onboarding for you?
I'm not quite sure. It's so long ago. I have no idea. And maybe it's not worth going totally into that. But I was really big in the Ruby and the Ruby on Rails world. I did. There were some things about Rails around Rails 2.0 that I started not to like, and I think it was somewhat caused by the proliferation of different little web frameworks, and I had always found, because I was the guy that spiked on code and took you from zero to nothing, and then grew it from there. That I always wanted to find the fastest way to go from 0 to 1. And Rails, despite it being amazing, was giving me problems, and I that's when I got attached to MERB very early on, and in particular with Data Mapper. I loved the ORM that we had over there.
I think wasn't Topology the Data Mapper? I think it had. I think actually I rewrote it for Active Record because, but I think it was originally Data Mapper was the ORM.
I post that if we want to talk about ORMs. It's kind of interesting. To this day, I think beautiful thing about Data Mapper was that it was one of the earliest ORMs to use this full-out query algebra, and we did it in Ruby, and it solved the n+1 problem and that kind of stuff. But then you use it enough, and you start to realize that an ORM is great for CRUD, but when you really want to get those complicated queries, you want to go back to SQL. You want to go back to SQL. You want to be able to optimize it. And I, to this day, respect SQL as an amazing innovation. I mean, but let's not get detoured. I'll go back to my career. So I was working with all these startups, and then I had a friend who was an angel investor and a VC, and he said, "Hey, can you help me out? I'm looking at this company. It's in the data space. I want you to like suss it out for me. Tell me if the team is real." And I found that my work as a tech consultant and as a technologist was so useful in being able to do that diligence. Wow, this is fun. And he asked, "Hey, maybe you could help me do this a little bit more often. I'd like to do more angel investments." And then he said, "Well, actually, I also run a fund of funds." And this is Alessandro Pio, which is an amazing angel investor. And he was operating also a fund of funds, which invested in top tier venture capital. So I started interning, effectively interning. I was a little old to be interning, but I did it anyway. And I started interning at this fund of funds, observing all of Sequoia, USV, et cetera. And then the next task was, "Hey, look, we're thinking about bootstrapping a data fund. You think about it, whatever you want to do." And I was like, "Okay, it's time to create some kind of machine learning fund." And I helped them stand that up, and those were my years in venture capital. I've got some interesting stories from that as well. And then, go ahead.
So you were pulled into that world rather than it being a career goal.
I think I always had wanted to work in finance. I remember I watched Barbarians at the Gate sometime when I was a kid, and I was like, "Okay, yeah, I like private equity. This kind of stuff is very interesting." And I was a little bit financially, a bit of a financial wonk. Like I used to read.
Yeah. There is something attractive about like the energy in that world. Like it definitely feels like there's a lot of highs and lows. And if you're looking for something that's a bit more even, that's not for you. But if you get it, like if you really, if you want to like get deep on something and you kind of get off on like those, I guess those thrills, like that definitely seems like a world that would be attractive to that type of personality. And also, I imagine the number of like problem sets you get exposed to as well is probably very attractive.
Yes, that was an exciting thing. I loved going and actually being semi-operational with these teams. Like, is there a key moment in time that I can come in and help them? And it was weird. Like we had portfolio companies. I would say, "Okay, hey, I'm going to come in. I'm going to spend a couple of days with you guys. Let's figure out where your technical debt is, like what you can change about your tech team and stuff like that." I think that was pretty unique amongst in the VC world to be that operational. But I loved it, and the sourcing and screening bit too was also great. I loved going in and meeting teams, and then talking to every single developer. Like, when we were early stage investors, right? So we were finding either seed or Series A and deploying capital there. And when you're early stage, your emphasis is on looking at the team and saying, "Okay, is this a team that isn't going to break apart or explode or something like that?" And of course, you have to think about, okay, well, is the market good? Is the tech good? But the first thing is the team. And
yeah.
The reason is, if the team's bad, it doesn't matter if the market's good or if the product's good, the thing's going to explode. And as a technical guy, I loved going in and saying, "Okay, look, we're going to invest in this founder. Who did they hire? Who did they hire? Which programmers are willing to come in here and work with them?" And I was delighted. I think probably one of the best finds in the portfolio that we constructed was what it occurred when I went down. I did kind of like the second round of diligence on this company, and I sat with each developer, and it just kind of like. Felt like, okay, well, what are their energies? What are they interested in? Why did they work at this company, et cetera? And I was blown away by the team, and I said, we've got to do this. That was secure, and
Oh,
secure now is it was a big win for us.
yeah.
But yeah, I've got some war stories about that too. I think we invested. I love that company. We invested, and then about 4 months in, we got a call from the founder, and the founder said, "You guys, you have some unfortunate news. We're shutting down. We're shutting down. Like we can't meet payroll. It's over."
Mm.
And the senior partner at my firm, he looked over at me. He didn't want to do this deal at first. Anyway, and he said, "I'm not giving them more money. I'm not giving them more money." And I said, "There's no way they're shutting down. Tell the team that I will personally find them jobs if we can't get them capital." And I went and I did the best matchmaking I could, and I found another firm that was super excited about the vision, and they stayed alive. And startups are that way. They're always on the cusp of dying, and someone's there driven to keep them alive over those little
Some may
chasms.
say that consultancies are always on the cusp of dying as well.
Oh
It's,
yeah, well that's for a different reason,
yeah, I know.
but it's true. Anyway, so I did that. I've also bootstrapped a SaaS company, a very
Mm.
sizable SaaS company with my wife, which I thought we were going to go raise venture money for that, but didn't get any takers. And then I said, okay, whatever, I'm just going to do this. We're just going to do it ourselves. We got the cash, and that was painful. It was a slog for the first few years. And then finally we hit product market fit, and wow, the internal growth on that has been huge. That's a company called Ox Panel. We provide
Yep.
analytics for dental practices, and so yeah, I've got a
Did
really hairy career.
did that product market fit come after? So how much of your original vision on that product maintained before you found that fit, or did you have to go through multiple rounds of like customer feedback, making adjustments, maybe not a full pivot, but definitely deviating from your original vision, or did you? It was just a matter of time in achieving like enough viability.
Oh, there was a lot of pivot. So I was at NYU. I was a visitor at NYU, and I was leading a deep learning seminar.
Mm.
And we were doing convolutional neural nets. And I looked at this and I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is the cusp of something exciting. And this was 2014.
Mm.
And I said, okay, well, where can I find good labeled images that are pretty regular, and we'll deploy this, and we'll dentistry. My wife was previously a dentist. I mean, she's still a dentist, but she doesn't work as a dentist. And I thought, okay, well, I knew that dentistry had this kind of images. And I thought, okay, my first thought was I just need to go get access to huge training sets, and then I'm gonna make something interesting. And at the time, I named the company Oxoid, like etymologically, ox as in helper and oid as in like. And then an investor told me, I don't like it. It sounds like hemorrhoid. And we changed it to, so even just names and stuff like that. But what we found was that this idea, and really what I had been chasing was this idea of, okay, I'm going to go deploy convolutional neural nets on this stuff and provide a clinical edge for these offices. Wasn't what they wanted. What they really wanted was really great business intelligence. And I ended up building a business intelligence app almost as if it were a Trojan horse to get into these offices, to convince them to start deeper integrations with us so that we can get those training sets. Never did it, because I realized that the business intelligence was such a great business, and there were secular trends in the market. So now we have users, they're doctors, they're OMs, they're regional directors, they're CFOs at large chains, they're like auditors that come in, use our system. They're like syndicated loan, admins will come in, like PE firms will use it, analysts. It's an amazing product. It was not what I intended to build, but it's there, and it's great.
The the history being from like technologist to, I guess, seeing how the sausage is made behind the investment scene, and now to product owner. And is that, do you see yourself staying in that role for the foreseeable future, or do you have something else that you want to get to at some point?
Oh, I'm always itching to do something new. You know, um, I like to think of myself as an adventurer of some sort, right? I'm looking for that new adventure.
Yeah.
Uh, Maybe I prefer to call myself sometimes a tech appreciator because I like to increase the value of things, but at the same time, I'm in it for the journey. I'm not just in it to make the money. I want to appreciate the act of crafting new technology. And wow, are we on the cusp of new exciting technologies?
Well, that's what I want to get
So
to. Yeah, that's what I want to
yeah,
get to next is what we've seen. I think like Google just announced today, or they're going to be pulling the trigger on it sometime in the next few days, but a layoff of like 30,000 tech workers. And we're going through this. Would you say that this is a reset in terms of like the tech world for not necessarily job security, but it feels like there's a turnover that's happening right now. And it's not quite what it was, say, around like 99 or what it was around 2008. This one feels a little bit different. And I don't have my finger on it exactly. I don't know if it's because we've seen such um, like huge growth on like tech overhead within companies. If that overhead in terms of people was always necessary, or if what we're looking towards in the next few years is a fundamental change on how companies are approaching their technology spends. Like, are they going to be more conservative, or are they going to be, now that maybe we're coming a little bit out of the inflationary period, are they going to go back to business as usual?
yeah. As if I know.
I
No,
know, but
but
I'm not asking. I'm
thanks
not
for
going to come back in
asking.
6 months and say, "Boy, why'd you
Um,
say that?" It's more
yeah,
like, what
so
is your sense?
yeah, I mean, so I understand finance very well. I mean, I worked in the finance space for a while. I even went through a program where I'm like a CFA charter holder. So I went through the series of testing to, like, I could become your financial advisor if you really want. But there's a lot of nuance in the situation right now, and I think
Yeah.
that you would see that broadly speaking, people do believe that we're at the end of a business cycle. But does that mean that we're about to enter into a recession? It's a little bit complicated. And at the same time, there are very interesting secular trends happening. We see this emergence of AI, like at a macro level. Is that going to be this boost to TFP that we've never seen before? But then again, it may also result in a bit of a structural change, right? Like, okay, how many people do you need in order to do certain things? But we go back to the fact that human basic needs have not yet been solved. Like, okay, sure,
Right.
maybe we'll see less people working at Google, but how many other products and businesses do genuinely need to be developed in order to satisfy human needs that have to this point gone entirely ignored?
Mm.
So I'd like to stay optimistic about that, but yes, I do think that we're going to go through a wave of structural changes. I do think that we're at the end of a business cycle. And, when you think about the end of a business cycle, you're thinking about, okay, what maybe a risk premium, the cost of capital, certain dynamics there. Inflation is kind of, a bit crowding that out. But I think, in the startup space, the multiples aren't so great, right? So
Mm.
if you've got a great company and you're in control of it right now, I would say, why sell it? If you have the opportunity to double its revenue and pay out dividends, you are in a way better position than selling your company right at this
Mm.
moment in time. So that's something weird, and because we're in that state at this moment in time, the amount of capital that's going to be deployed into things is going to be genuinely reduced. I think we had a glut of investors come in a number of spaces, in venture. There was a lot of money that was thrown into crypto in not in an unhealthy way. Don't give VCs immediate liquidity. That you create bad things, and then. You also see the emergence of things like private credit, right? So private credit or venture debt, stuff like that. A lot of changes, and again, end of the business cycle.
What is venture debt?
What is venture debt? So typically, when we think about venture capital, they're just talking about the equity stack. I'm going to come in, I'm going to give you some capital, and then you're going to give me some equity in exchange for preferred stock. But venture debt, typically, you'll find a firm that's going to come in, and maybe they will take some equity, but at the same time, they've got maybe their LPs are actually a syndicated network of lenders. They're going to come in, and they're also going to add some debt to your company. And so typically this happens a little bit later stage. So we're not talking about super early companies. But I have also seen that private credit and venture debt has been approaching smaller and smaller companies. So the middle market has become hotter and hotter. But at the same time,
Do you feel like? So I actually have a couple different directions I could go in. I guess the first one I'll start with is when you mentioned that we were at the end of a business cycle. What's been interesting, I've observed at least, is that whenever we have hit that end of a business cycle over the past few decades, there always seemed to be like a new technology to kind of like pull us out, right? Or bring us into the next one. So like 99, you had really Rails. Rails was like one of the first frameworks to come along and say, hey, we can do it better, faster, cheaper. And then after the housing crisis, this is, even though they existed prior to this, but this is when the social networks really took off. And that space was huge. Do you see now AI being that thing that will pull us out of if this is the end of a business cycle, bring us into the next one?
I'm not necessarily going to place a bet on AI, but I'll tell you, generally speaking, what you've observed is something that economists have also observed. And there's a very famous economist, Carlota Perez, who talks about this extensively, that there is an installation period, and then there's this second wave. And the first installation period tends to decimate the companies that come in early. Of course, there tend to be some highly disciplined companies, a la Amazon, that survive and prosper on that second wave. But that first installation period is really about just getting the tech out there. And the second one is about making the money. And yes, I do think that AI companies right now and AI tech in general, we're going to see that decimation of AI companies, but then we're going to see people who come out in the second wave and they really know how to make it a business.
That's what I've always felt too, is that it takes time. Like the technology comes out first and people are like, oh, this is cool, but what can we do with it? And it just takes time, sometimes years, for that technology to have that fit, or for people that are product minded to start wrapping their mind about how to apply this technology to new products. And it's usually like anywhere from a 5 to 10 year period. But I kind of get the feeling that with that is accelerating, like that time is getting compressed. Maybe in part because there's more people in technology now, so there's more opportunity for those things to get accelerated. Maybe it's just the technology itself is mature enough. Like AI, machine learning really has been under development for a few decades at this point. It's just that now the average person's being exposed to it. But I mean, I think all along the ways, I've always been able to look ahead and say like, oh, this is going to be the next thing. This is going to be the next thing. This is going to be the next thing. I honestly don't know what the next thing is going to be after like better machine learning or the AI, just the general AI, if that ever becomes a real thing. But beyond that, I mean, it's starting to feel like a bit. I know this is probably the wrong thing to say because something will come out and just say, Brian, you're wrong. But it's starting to feel a bit like we're a bit tapped out idea-wise. But I also have not been super tapped into the academic scene like years ago. So I at a high school, my father's accountant was also Marvin Minsky's accountant, the father of artificial intelligence at MIT. And I was applying to college, and my dad's accountant was like, "Oh, I want you to meet someone." So I went in and I met Marvin Minsky. He gave me a tour of the MIT Media Lab. This was back in like '97, I think, '98.
Wow.
And I got to meet Dr. Steven Strassman, who wrote the Unix Haters Handbook. He gave me a signed copy. I still have it. And at that time, I was going through the Media Lab. They showed me this device. I was like, "What's that?" And it was an early like prototype of a 3D printer. And now downstairs, I have a toy box that I got my kids for Christmas, $300, and they're just printing out toys left and right. And that took 2 decades, 2+ decades to get to, 2.5 decades. And, so I don't know if you're particularly tapped into what's on the cusp of academia technology wise, but I do feel like that's something that I need to start. I've been two heads down on like the today and not enough heads up on what could potentially be coming in the future. But I think there's also like a balance to be had in terms of like, how do you take advantage of where we are versus how do you continuously put yourself ahead of opportunities that may come about in the future?
Yeah, and I think when you think about AI, you can't skip Minsky. And
Yeah.
I've met him before. I've chatted with him. I've sat in on some of his classes, but he was also wrong about the early days of AI. And
Right.
if you go back and think about AI, he was obsessed with what we now call GoFi, right? Like good old fashioned AI. And it was this idea that, okay, we're going to create these symbolic logic systems, and they are going to somehow achieve general artificial intelligence. And when you read the perceptron, which is interesting that Minsky wrote that book. In some ways, it was a way to actually conceptually kill out the subsymbolic team, and the XOR problem with a single perceptron. Oh, it can't do XOR, stuff like that. Yeah, I don't. I'm sorry. I know so much about the history of AI, and there have been great AI winters in the past. So I do think we'll probably experience one again. I think it'll more be a decimation of companies. It's not going to be like the GoFi days. I think, But then again, think about Lisp, right? Like Lisp found great opportunities to enable startups. You think about Paul Graham. You think about ViaWeb. You think about there was a cohort that was leveraging Lisp in a way that it gave them the edge over the big companies to be able to write code in a way that others couldn't. So
yeah,
even if the big trend gets it wrong, there always seems to be some kind of tech that comes out of it that enables the developer.
And is that an edge that startups should be on the lookout for taking advantage of? Like where is the, so you said you evaluated startups upon three things. There was the product market fit, market opportunity, the people, and then the tech stack. Like, how important were the tech decisions? I'm sure if something was just like a ball of mud, this isn't going to scale, or if it was a good idea, you'd probably come in and say, we got to reboot this. But was it a significant driver of decision there?
Yeah,
And was it something that making the right tech decisions can give you that burn rate, a longer burn rate to get lucky, or you're not going to have to incur, like, were the cost considerations deferred to later where it's like, okay, we can pay for scale? And is that still tolerated nowadays?
Well, I mean, it depends upon the industry. It totally depends upon the industry. I would read Paul Graham's essay "Beating the Averages." It's a great one on why use Lisp when when the broader market isn't using it. Why should you, as a startup, use Lisp? And we're on the Elixir Roundtable podcast, so you could just replace Elixir right in there. And of course, the truth is that you do need to beat the averages in one way or another, but how it's helping you do that might be different at a different time, right? Like maybe it's about being able to write the business logic quicker and faster and find that product market fit faster. Or maybe it's actually about cost savings. Maybe it's about being able to deploy cheaper. So And I think that the nuance of that is going to be is going to be different in each individual case. So I'm not going to give you advice that applies to everybody. And I mean, I spent time sussing out medical devices as well, right? So and I would say in the medical device space, tech really matters. Like you better make that thing work up front.
Can't turn off.
No, it's got to be perfect. It's got the machine learning has to be good, and I have some horror stories from that too. But any technology that enables you to do things faster or cheaper, you've got to think about your market, and you think, okay, what differentiates me from the competition? But more importantly, what helps me better serve the customer? If your product is more consumery, let's hold off on that. If your product is more enterprise, normally the pitch goes, okay, you're pitching to enterprise customers. Tell them how much you're going to save them. And then they'll immediately sign up. But even though that's the pitch, I would tell you internally, think about how much growth you're going to enable your enterprise customer to do. Because really, when you're working in an enterprise space, if you're giving your customer a tool that's going to enable rapid growth, you're also growing your own company rapidly.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask is when enterprise level companies, because like making a 1% change is usually a large dollar amount for companies that size. But if you're introducing something that's cheaper, are they thinking that this is going to be now capital that they can reinvest into their growth, or are they thinking that money's going to be going elsewhere?
Companies are growth oriented, right? The market is growth oriented. If you're in that space, it's about growth. I mean, there are certain sectors where bringing down cost is important, but generally speaking, growth is what the market loves. And when you think about cash flows and how they're discounted, they're discounted based off of two things. What is the prevailing cost of capital effectively, and then what is the growth of your company? And those are the two major factors discounting or helping you determine what the valuation of your company is. So if you can enable growth, I think yes, go for it. Growth is great. Actually, you know what? I have a little bit of an aside though, because I know we're on the Elixir Roundtable podcast, and I've never written a line of Elixir ever. So, but I do have a story about Elixir, and I really want to bring this up. So, in 2009, and I have to date myself because the date is relevant. I was asked by some students at Northeastern University to come give a talk, like an ACM kind of little talk. They were having programmers come in and talk about things, and they had seen me give a kind of like a talk that was exciting about the difference between Rails and MERB. And they said, "Can you do that for programming languages? Can you give us an exciting talk where you pit the programming languages against one another and then tell us what's best?" And so I gave this talk, and I gave them this huge landscape of all the programming languages out there. And honestly, programming languages, most part they're all Turing complete. It tends to be implementation and libraries and stuff like that really make the difference at any point in time. But when I was done with the talk, someone raised their hand and they asked, "Okay, so tell me, what's the future programming language? What programming language is the future?" And I said, "Wait, would you want me to pick one of these? Which one's going to be the programming language of the future?" And they said, "No, it doesn't have to necessarily be one. What is the future programming language like?" And I said, I looked at the board with all the languages, and I said, it's going to be a mashup of these two things. It's going to be a mashup of Ruby and Erlang. Erlang because the implementation, you want these transparent processes. You don't want to
Yeah.
have to think about the hardware. You want to be able to scale efficiently, that kind of thing. It's such a unique value prop. Beam, everything. That's what you want. And I had played around with Erlang back then, but at the same time, it's like no, getting a developer to switch to Erlang was hard. And then
Yeah, when
I
you got to
look at
put
Ruby.
periods at the end of your statements, it's like, what am I
No,
doing?
it's a great. It's such an amazing piece of work, Erlang.
Yeah.
The syntax aside, the thing that I was looking at for Ruby though, and why I wanted to see this mashup was that Ruby enabled metaprogramming, and metaprogramming allows you to encode business logic as quick as possible. And so the combination of those two things, being able to cheaply scale without having to think about re-engineering your product all the time, and being able to encode the business logic as quickly as possible, that is a very a powerful combination. So that was 2009. Elixir did not exist, and here we are, 2024, living in the future, and literally that is the future programming language right now. So
Yeah. I mean, that is by and large some of my reasons for heading this direction with Elixir. But I mean, what we've been really betting on is that like it solves a lot of problems. But what's also true in tech is that there's a lot of followers too. I don't mean that in a negative sense. Just that if like Facebook comes out with a framework, it immediately like has a certain percentage of market share. If Google puts out a programming language, it gets a lot of attention. And so what's always been missing for Elixir is a big enterprise champion to kind of like give it credibility. There are companies using it. Apple's using it. We're on a couple of Apple projects using Elixir. Like Discord is using Elixir. WhatsApp is the huge Erlang success story, but none of them have really kind of like planted their flag and say like, this is our tech. And that's really what unfortunately has been missing thus far. And it's Dockyard's not a big company, but we have a big presence in the space. Our hope is that we continue to invest in it, we continue to develop it, and then we'll eventually hit that product market fit with the technology, like just like you did, and we'll grow alongside of it. So we made this early investment in this tech space. We see all the values it has, but it's still a bet. It's still a risk. I believe in it to the point where I bet my company on it, but it has everything that I've ever wanted in a programming language, nearly, except for a type system, which Jose is actively working on right now. But it's also a programming language that I haven't had as much fun in writing since Ruby, which is rare. It's really tough. Doing years of JavaScript, I think gave me a lot of PTSD, and I don't mean to discount people with actually PTSD. Just that it wasn't fun. It felt like work. This doesn't feel like work to me.
I think it's great to disclose that weakness with Elixir, which is effectively that it does not yet have a spawn point. Other languages have these spawn points. Like developers are just dropping into JavaScript because, hey, that's what the browser's got, right? Or they're dropping into Python because that's what they see in the academic world.
I don't think it's a problem like talking about the deficiencies of something, because otherwise, if you're ignoring it, it's not going to get fixed. It's not going to be addressed. If you're talking about it, then maybe we incentivize at some point, one of these companies, or even if there's a big company that's coming up the ranks, looking to adopt it. But it's going to happen at some point. Just a matter of, what part of the tech cycle that's with. For me too, the other nice thing is because Erlang has been around for 30 years, it's kind of like semi-permanent in its stability. Whereas I kind of felt like with other technologies, as I was on that merry-go-round, like every few years, especially in consulting, you constantly have to reinvent yourself. And I'm only 44, but I was exhausted doing that. And so I'm hoping at least with this time that there's going to be a long future ahead of us. But even if there's not, I'm enjoying the ride so far. It's fun.
Well, I'm curious to ask, like, are there other technologies or things on the cusp, nascent tech that's intriguing you right now?
Outside of Elixir?
Outside of Elixir, yeah.
It's hard because my day is so focused on Elixir does. I don't know if you saw, but Chris McCord, who created Phoenix, he just released this thing called Flame, which completely reinvents serverless. It actually solves a lot of the serverless problems built in Elixir. Then there's the NX. Sorry, I'm talking about Elixir. You're asking about things outside of Elixir.
No, that's
Honestly,
fine. That's fine.
yeah, for me, a lot of it is in the machine learning space. A lot of it, I actually have a lot of interest in hardware as well. I think like micro devices, things with screens, like the whole like hobbyist scene around Raspberry Pis. I like in part supply chain messed up that scene because you have a lot of companies that are doing like professional stuff with these hobbyist boards that just bought up all the supply. But that's starting to turn around now that the boards are becoming like the Pi Zeros are back in stock, or at least were. Uh, I've been doing stuff like that. So like one thing, this is like pure just like hacker stuff. So I should probably have posted a video of this. For Halloween last year, I went to Home Depot and I bought all these like animatronics from uh, A Nightmare Before Christmas. So we had like Jack Skellington and I forget the woman's character, and then the guy in the sack. And I had just hooked them up, and they were just like playing. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, these are just like low voltage wires going to each servo. And so for this year, I ended up I got a bunch of Pi Zeros beforehand, and I hooked every single one up. And I wrote a script to control them. And so it was like I had that house in the neighborhood where you go by. And then next year, what I'm thinking about doing is I can take the songs I was just playing like the music over a speaker. I can take the songs from the movies and then use machine learning, or I could just do it by hand and isolate the section of the song that a character is singing at. And so that it's sending like, okay, for this section of song, we got to move their mouth now. So I'm basically reinventing like early like Disney World in my house to a certain extent. There were like wires running everywhere, and it, driving my wife nuts. But I think when I get excited about something is when I can get away from like building like polished products and get more to the hacker stuff, where it's like, okay, I can do something quickly, have it be cool, but this isn't something I can sell. Like this is kind of like fun to do. Those are the things that I think I get most excited about outside of like my professional work. And then of course, like we have this whole, we're doing some R&D projects around sailing and building out machine learning intelligence for sailboat racing. And that's a passion of mine as well. So I think that Elixir leaks into that, but they're not Elixir specific in any way. They're more kind of like the concept of it's fun to be at that point in my career where like I have an idea on doing something, like I can do that. I'll just go ahead and do it. It's kind of weird, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah, those are cool projects. And I know you have two kids, and doing that kind of hackish project in front of them, incorporating them, it's such a great way for them to learn and get excited about technology. So, and it's something that's real fun to do with kids as well. Like I've got one of those, FDM 3D printers where it drops like the PLA and builds it up. But they've also got those resin printers, and those resin printers, just thinking of dentistry, like in dentistry, those are used to actually at offices in the back in the lab, print out effectively what becomes a clear aligner for you. So let's say you wanted to straighten your teeth, they may do a 3D scan and then start their resin printer up, and then afterwards, force the thing that becomes your clear aligner. So.
Oh, they're printing it in the dentist offices now?
They print them right there in the dentist offices. And of course, there's also CAD/CAM stuff that's been used to mill out stuff. But, as far as resin 3D printing goes, a lot of the clear aligners are printed in office, which is amazing. And you'll find that there are a lot of dentists that geek out about that.
It's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's like as close as we can get to like Star Trek replicators at this point.
I with my kid's he's 4, but like we'll go into various programs and we'll extrude stuff, and then we'll go print it out. And he loves letters, so we'll go and we'll extrude letters. Maybe he likes weird letters that aren't used anymore. Maybe like thorn or something like that. And like we'll go and we'll make a thorn magnet, or maybe we'll go into Blender. He'll go into sculpt mode and sculpt out his own world, and then we'll print it. So other technologies that I'm really interested in. You mentioned hardware. I'm very interested in hardware specification languages and how the technology that's been used there for a long time, in particular things like modal logic, have not been used in the software space yet. So. which is fascinating. And I think we're probably on the cusp of being able to use modal logic in ways that no one's really thought about yet. I don't know if you guys know about if you look into languages like TLA plus or stuff like that, aspects of safety and liveness. But yeah, I'm interested in that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, in that as well. So what I've noticed, like the pace of technology advancement is super fast. Like a lot of the leads that still come into Dockyard, I feel like most of the entrepreneurial crowd or the product facing crowd may not be aware of even what like modern or even like a few years old technology is capable at this point. And they're still thinking about like how to solve problems with what we were capable of like 10, 15 years ago. It's tricky, like how like communicating the current potential on technology outside of like, oh, it's faster or it can scale better. Like just some of the facets that help differentiate one tech stack versus another have been a difficult kind of bridge to cross with product people, or they just don't, they're like indifferent to the tech implementation. They're more interested in the problem set, which is fine. But I feel like that if more entrepreneurs were aware of or had a better grasp on the potential of today's technology, they may be looking to solve problems a bit differently that would potentially have a better, more unique product fit than going out there and saying like, I'm going to build another sneaker shop or some. I don't not like putting it down. Just that it's there's the the will to do something, but there's also like, okay, what tools do I have to solve this, and what potential do these tools bring to my idea? That feels like either the technology is just advancing too fast for people to be ahead of it, or they need someone like yourself that that knows they can go in and guide them, or maybe they're right that the particular idea that they have, despite it being a bit I'm not going to use the term old fashioned, but just more not as cutting edge as it could be, perhaps is better. It's a so we did a product for Netflix, and we had built it as a progressive web app, and the idea was we were going to build it once and it's going to deploy on everyone's phones. But the problem that we couldn't get people past was the installation process, because they were, some of them had iPhones. They didn't have. I've got to click on like the bookmark thing. I got to bookmark it to my screen. And once they did that, everything was fine. But they're so like learned on just using the App Store that they were like, these weren't like technology focused people. They're just average consumers. That the idea of going out and re-educating everyone on how to install an application didn't feel like it was worth it. It was a better solution, just like, we're going to knock this down and rebuild it in a native app.
Well, now, I mean, with Apple, you can actually submit progressive web apps and get them in the App Store. But it's true, distribution is a big roadblock for a lot of technologies. And when you have that distribution, is one of the things that allow a tech stack to win. And I think, for instance, even JavaScript, right? Like, is JavaScript the best language? It's interesting, but it's definitely not the best language. But because
it's the winner, though,
distribution, right? Like, and it's gotten better over time. But still, that distribution is the thing that enables it.
I'm curious what TOB has listed as number one. Is it JavaScript? Python? Oh, JavaScript's number 6. I always figured JavaScript would be higher.
Yeah,
but Python, I can see.
Is TypeScript distinctly on that list?
That's a good question. 38. So even if you add it on to JavaScript, it's not going to be too much different. I mean, TOB is a questionable ranking system to begin with, but if it's it's generally like the top 5 are pretty popular. So okay, we're past time, but I want to wrap up. Foy, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure chatting.